Good morning and welcome back to another virtual edition of Children's Church. It's looking a little stormy outside today, but you know what I say? Bring on the thunder. That probably doesn't make any sense right now. I'm just kind of being weird, but it'll make sense eventually. We are in the book of 1 Samuel, and we've been here for a couple months now, but there's so much that we still have to learn. We've learned a lot, though, already. So if you need to remember what's happened so far in the book of 1 Samuel, I highly recommend going back to last week's video, and there you will find a recap of everything that's happened in 1 Samuel so far, and it's a very quick recap because it's literally sped up. So if you need a bird's eye view, get it? Bird's eye view, because we're up high right now looking down. If you need an overview, go back to that video. Yeah, let's keep going. We're picking up in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 3. And it says, "And Samuel said to all the house of Israel," so Samuel, he makes his proclamation 20 years after the ark was returned back to Israel from the Philistines. He says this to all of Israel. "If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines." So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Before we dive into this whole Ashtaroth and Baal business, whatever that's talking about, I just wanted to take a second to look at Samuel's question that he gives to the people. And it's a question that I'm going to be asking you right now, and you should be asking yourself. I'm going to be asking myself as well. So the question is, do you want to follow God with your whole heart? And if you do, then that means that we need to stop serving these other gods. We need to stop serving ourselves and just following what we want, and instead turn and follow God. Now, this is a question we need to ask ourselves, not just one time, but every single day. If you are a follower of Jesus, that doesn't mean that you just followed him at one point. That means that every day when you wake up, you again decide to follow him one step after the other, and to do what he is calling you to do. And you need to keep asking yourself this question every day, and like every hour, even every minute, because when we mess up and we fail, which we will do, we need to stop and ask ourselves, now, am I going to continue going away from God and turning away from him? Or am I going to stop, ask him to forgive me, ask him to cleanse me of my sins, and turn back towards him and start following after him once again? That is the question. Are you going to follow Jesus with your whole heart? And if the answer is yes, then that means that we need to stop serving ourselves and stop bowing down or worshiping our comfort and our desires and our likes and our preferences, and rather start following God and doing what he calls us to do, trusting that that is what's going to be best for us. So who is this Baal and Ashtaroth? I mean, they were two very important gods, well, a god and goddess, who weren't actually real, but they were gods that the people worshipped in those surrounding nations, all right? So they're gonna come up again and again. Maybe you could think of like, Greek mythology. You think of people like Zeus and Poseidon and Aphrodite and Hades and all these different gods and goddesses. Well, people really believed in them and worshipped them. And other gods and goddesses that people believed and worshipped around Israel's day was Baal and Ashtaroth. Now, Ashtaroth, she was a female goddess, and she was someone who you would worship in order to be more fruitful, meaning that you would have more and more kids in your family, and that you'd have more and more grain and crops and, stuff from the farm and stuff. You get more and more of that. So they would worship her, and they would worship Baal, who was a major male god in those surrounding nations. Again, he wasn't real, but people really did worship him. And they believed that he would also bless your harvest. He would allow you to have more and more crops because he would send down the rain. He would send down the rain on the land, and that would allow you to have better and better crops for your farming, which is a big deal when you really depended on that in order to get food, in order to have money and everything that you need. That was the people in that area, their main jobs were being farmers, and they depended on that rain in order to get their crops. So they would worship Baal in hopes that he would send more and more rain. Another thing that they would call him is the god of thunder. No, not Thor. But they would call him that, which makes sense because, like the rain, thunder, thunderstorms, that kind of stuff. But that's going to be important for later. Even though Israel knew better, they too started worshiping these other gods and goddesses like Baal and Ashtaroth. And they thought that by worshiping these gods and these goddesses that they would be able to get more and more things like security and money and all this different stuff. But the reality is that worship of those fake gods only brought harm and brought them farther away from the one true God. So when Samuel says to Israel, look, do you really want to turn from your evil ways? Do you really want to follow after God with your whole heart? Well, then you need to stop worshiping these fake and false gods. The people had to think about what they wanted to do. And the answer is in 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 5. It says, then Samuel said, gather all Israel, everybody, at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. So the people, everybody in Israel, they come and gather with Samuel and they confess their sins to one another, to Samuel, and to God. They ask for forgiveness. What a beautiful picture of this whole group of people that seem to be turning back to God and being cleansed from their sins so that they can follow after him. Will it last? I don't know. Is it really true? Is it really their heart's desire? I'm not sure. But Samuel does something else very interesting right after. Or maybe I should say that Samuel was going to do something interesting, but then things turned for the worse. They got very sketchy and scary because the Philistines had heard that Israel was gathering all together in this worship service, and it sounded like they were not going to be prepared for war. So the Philistines were going to take advantage of this moment and attack. All right, so this is verse 7. Now, when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, what do you think they were going to say? What do you think that they would say to Samuel in this fear? I mean, I'd be terrified if the Philistines, this vicious, brutal enemy was coming for me and I didn't have any weapons. I didn't have my armor, nothing. I'm just here sitting vulnerable. This could be the end of my life. This could be a terrible defeat for Israel. So what do they say to Samuel? What do they ask him to do? Well, they said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. They asked Samuel to keep on praying, just praying that God would somehow show up there in that moment, even though they were completely defenseless. They were not ready for war, and they were just like sitting ducks. I mean, the Philistines could take them out so easily. So they had to pray to God and rely on him and trust in him to save them from the enemy. Today's video was brought to you by the letter C.
Why C?
C for children's church. I don't know. Trivia time. All right, so we're going back to the story of Adam and Eve, all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, as a matter of fact. Now, Adam and Eve had just messed up big time. They ate the fruit of the tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. And God, well, he does something really interesting. He gives them a gift. Why would God give them a gift? His people had just turned their backs on him. But he did. Does anybody know what that gift was? Was it a big chocolate cake? Maybe the newest smartphone? No, it was clothing. Because when Adam and Eve sinned, they felt something called shame. They realized that they were naked, they didn't have any clothes on, and they got very embarrassed about that, and they wanted to cover up themselves. And so they made those like fig leaves into clothes, and it didn't really work out that well. And so God, he comes and he takes an animal and he kills the animal, and he takes the fur from the animal and makes clothes that will actually cover Adam and Eve well. Do a much better job than some leaves. And so he could cover their shame. That might be important. Now Samuel, he did something very similar to what God did on that day when Adam and Eve had messed up. Samuel made a sacrifice of atonement. So what he did was he sacrificed a lamb. And the reason that he did that is it was seen as a way to cleanse the people of their sins. In the same way that God, he killed an animal and then the skin was turned into clothing to cover up the shame of Adam and Eve. Well, when a lamb was sacrificed as a sacrifice of atonement, which means to cover and to cleanse, that the blood from the lamb was seen as something that would cover the people, to cover their shame and to wash them clean from their sins. Now, if you were Samuel, you probably would have been looking for some weapons, maybe some armor, anything that they could do to try to, not all be killed by the Philistines who were coming very close. But Samuel, he kept on praying and he kept on worshiping God and asking for forgiveness. Samuel, along with the rest of the people in that moment, their only trust was in God. They were trusting that he would come and help save them because they were helpless without him. This reminds me of Psalm 51 that you've been learning. It's a psalm that's all about being made clean and receiving forgiveness. And I am coming to you from the men's bathroom at church because there's always great acoustics in the bathroom. It always echoes a little bit. It's fun to sing in there. So why not, all right? Have you ever sung inside of the bathroom before? It's a lot of fun. Have mercy on me, oh God, according to your steadfast love. Have mercy on me, oh God, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. Blot out my transgressions, cleanse me from my sin. From my sin, create in me a clean heart, oh God. Renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Oh, Not like you're pooping, I'm kidding. Now that is something. Well, that just happened. But we still have to get back to our story because remember, the Philistines, they are coming full speed ahead, spear in hand, and the Israelites are defenseless. Or are they? All right, so chapter 7, verse 9. Verse 9. So Samuel took a nursing lamb, right? We just heard about this, and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered. With a mighty sound that day against the Philistines, and threw them into confusion. And they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Bethkar. That's crazy. Wait, isn't Baal supposed to be the god of thunder? Well, guess who made the thunder? That's right, the real God, creator of heaven and earth. And he was like, watch out, Philistines. You think you can attack my people? Not today. And God sends this thunder down, and there's all this crazy confusion, and the Philistines don't know what's going on, and next thing you know, they've been defeated. The Israelites, they didn't need anyone or anything else but God. Now, the last piece of our story is something super important that I definitely do not do well, and I need to do a better job of. The Israelites, with Samuel's lead, they created a memorial. They put these stones together to remember that day, the incredible way that God had rescued them. Now, I'm standing in front of this weird cheetah print board because there is a reason. Can I flip this back around? There we go. So here we have the wonderful quote board of the middle school room. Now, these things wouldn't make any sense to you, but to me, they definitely do. I mean, shatter, mazel tov, that was a great moment. Winky window, you're not old enough for that one. Turn on the dark, that was fun. Crinkle or fold, I will never forget crinkle or fold. Ask Pastor Aaron about it. It's pretty comical, but also a great question that's just, really says a lot about who people are. But anyways, now this quote board was created so that we as middle school leaders and middle school students and then high school students could look back at it and remember these really funny moments that happened in youth group. Now, we created a memorial of sorts to help remember these things. And we need to do the same thing. When we learn something about God, when he shows up in a really cool way, when he answers a prayer with an unexpected miracle, whatever it is that he does, we should remember those things by setting up some sort of a memorial. They set up stones so they could look back at that structure. It's actually called a cairn, but whatever. And other people did that too in the Bible. And so that they could remember that structure and point back to that and be like, remember that time that God did this amazing thing. But maybe you write it down in a journal. Or maybe you take a video vlog of the crazy stories that happens, these testimonies. We can't forget them. We need to remember them, and we need to have different things in place so that we can look back and remember how God showed up even when we didn't expect it in these different ways. Because sometimes we feel like God isn't there. But when we look back to those things and remember what God has done, our hearts are encouraged. We have faith once again and hope once again to continue following after him. Well, that's all that we had for today in our story, and wherever you're coming from around the world. I'm so funny. So funny. I hope that you're having an awesome day. Don't forget to keep on memorizing those verses. Let me know when you memorize them if you're not at church so I can get you some prizes. Doesn't matter if you're here or not. I just love that you're memorizing God's word. It's so important. And honestly, the real prize is having God's word hidden in your heart. But, having a mini whoopee cushion is fun too. So why not? That's all I'm saying. All right, so have a wonderful week, guys, and I will catch you later. All right? See ya.